My name is Austin Rodriguez. I'm 38 years old, a staff sergeant in the United States Air Force, and for the past 20 years, I've served my country with honor. Stationed at Ellington Field in Houston, Texas, I've completed 4 international deployments. The most recent one to Qatar would teach me everything I needed to know about betrayal and the cold satisfaction of methodical revenge. Before I left for that deployment in February 2024, I made sure everything was locked down tight. The mortgage on our house in the Heights was current. My pride and joy, a custom 2016 Dodge Challenger that I'd spent 3 years and $18,000 building into a 500 horsepower monster, sat safely in the garage. Every modification had been carefully chosen: cold air intake, performance exhaust, upgraded suspension, custom paint job in military green with subtle Air Force detailing. That car wasn't just transportation. It was 3 years of Sunday afternoons, scraped knuckles, and the satisfaction of building something perfect with my own hands. But the Challenger was only half the story. Over 15 years of military service, I'd built up a side business that most guys could only dream of. A custom welding truck worth $35,000, loaded with professional-grade equipment that represented my ticket to financial independence after the Air Force. Lincoln welders, Miller plasma cutters, specialty TAG rigs, and hand tools that had taken me years to collect. Each piece of equipment had been chosen for a specific purpose, tested in real-world conditions, and maintained like military hardware. The truck itself was a beast, a modified Ford F-50, with a custom aluminum bed designed to haul equipment to remote job sites. I'd welded half the modifications myself, including a crane boom rated for 3,000 pounds and storage compartments secured with military-grade locks. That rolling workshop could handle everything from pipeline repair to architectural metalwork, and it was generating close to $2,000 a month in supplemental income. Our joint bank accounts were organized, bills set up on autopay, everything by the book. I'd even updated my will and made sure Isabella had power of attorney for routine financial matters while I was overseas. Standard military protocol, but it also showed the level of trust I placed in my wife of 7 years. Isabella Rodriguez worked as a real estate agent with Keller Williams, pulling down about $65,000 a year when the market was good. She understood property law, contracts, and legal documentation better than most military spouses. She'd handled our home purchase in 2022, negotiating the deal while I was on temporary duty in Colorado. I thought that made her the perfect person to watch over everything while I was deployed. What I didn't realize was that her professional knowledge of real estate transactions would become the weapon she'd use against me. The deployment to Qatar started normal enough. Al Udeid Air Base. Long days maintaining aircraft systems, limited internet access, and the usual grind of overseas operations. But something felt wrong almost immediately. Isabella's messages became shorter, then sporadic. Then they just stopped altogether. At first, I chalked it up to her being busy with real estate showings or the 12-hour time difference throwing us off sync. But that gut feeling you develop after 2 decades of military service was screaming that something was very wrong. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. The first real warning sign came in mid-March when I tried to access our joint checking account online. The login credentials had been changed. When I called the bank using their military overseas number, they informed me that Isabella had requested new online access codes and hadn't listed me as an authorized user for remote account management. Strange, since I'd set up that account specifically for deployment access. The second warning sign was her complete radio silence about my welding business. Before deployment, we'd talked extensively about which contracts to pursue while I was gone, which equipment might need maintenance, and how to handle customer inquiries. She'd seemed genuinely interested in helping manage the business side of things. Now, when I managed to get through on a rare, clear phone connection, she claimed everything was fine, but couldn't give me any specifics. It was my buddy stationed back at Ellington, Miguel Santos, we called him Little Santos, to distinguish him from Big Santos in supply, who finally confirmed what I'd been dreading. His message came through in late April during one of my rare internet windows, and the words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Isabella had sold my Challenger, But that wasn't even the worst part. She'd also sold my welding truck. This wasn't just betrayal. This was the systematic destruction of everything I'd built over nearly 2 decades. The Challenger represented years of weekend work, every bolt torqued to specification, every modification researched and carefully installed. But the welding truck, that was my livelihood, my post-military career plan, my freedom from depending on anyone else for financial security. Santos's message included details that made my blood run cold. Isabella had listed both vehicles on Facebook Marketplace within days of each other in early April. The Challenger went for $14,000, half what it was worth after my modifications. The welding truck sold for $28,000 to some contractor in Beaumont, who probably had no idea he was buying stolen equipment. But here's where it got even worse. Santos had heard from neighbors in our subdivision that Isabella had moved another man into our house. Some guy named Perry Walsh, who managed a Chevrolet dealership downtown. This bastard was now sleeping in my bed, eating at my table, probably laughing about the stupid soldier deployed overseas while he lived the life that was supposed to be mine. The betrayal cut deeper than any enemy fire I'd ever faced. Isabella didn't bother with explanations, no apologetic emails trying to justify her actions, no lengthy text messages attempting to smooth things over. Just complete, calculated radio silence. She'd made a bet that I was too far away to do anything about it, that my service to this country made me vulnerable and powerless. The thousands of miles separating Qatar from Houston would protect her from any consequences. But here's what Isabella had forgotten about her husband. I'm not just a staff sergeant with 20 years of military experience. I'm also a certified master welder with union connections stretching across the entire Gulf Coast region. More importantly, I'm someone who understands the value of preparation and documentation. 3 months before deployment, in January 2024, I'd visited the Legal Assistance Office on Ellington Field. It seemed like routine paperwork at the time, just making sure everything was protected while I was overseas serving my country. The JAG attorney, Major Patricia Steele, had been thorough in ways I didn't fully appreciate until Isabella's betrayal came to light. Major Steele was a sharp lawyer with 15 years of experience handling military family issues. She'd seen every type of deployment disaster imaginable: spouses who disappeared with the bank accounts, family members who sold vehicles without permission, even cases where entire households were liquidated while service members were overseas. Her approach was methodical and comprehensive. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, she'd explained during our February consultation, I always recommend a military protection trust for deployed service members, especially those with significant assets. It's not that I think your spouse would do anything wrong, but it protects both of you from potential complications. The document she'd prepared wasn't your basic estate planning paperwork. Military protection trusts include federal safeguards that civilian trusts don't have, backed by the Service Members Civil Relief Act and additional Texas state protections. The trust specifically prohibited the sale, transfer, lease, or unauthorized use of protected property without my express written consent, notarized and verified through official channels. Major Steele had been specific about what qualified as protected property. The house, obviously, but also any registered vehicles and business equipment specifically listed in the filing. I'd been smart enough, or maybe just paranoid enough, to include detailed descriptions of both the Challenger and the welding truck, complete with VIN numbers, equipment serial numbers, and estimated values. Isabella had signed every page, barely reading the documents while she scrolled through her phone. When Major Steele asked if she had any questions about the legal implications, Isabella had just smiled and said it all sounded fine. The paperwork was filed with Harris County within a week, properly registered and legally bulletproof. At the time, it seemed like just another box to check before deployment. Now, it was my nuclear option. Looking back, I should have seen the signs earlier. Starting in late 2023, Isabella had been pulling away gradually, so slowly that I'd convinced myself it was nothing serious. She'd become less interested in my welding projects, asking why I couldn't just find a normal job after the military instead of running my own business. She spent more time with her real estate colleagues, always networking at happy hours and weekend open houses. The conversations about our future had become shorter and less frequent. When I had tried to discuss expansion plans for the welding business, maybe hiring an apprentice or investing in a second truck, She'd change the subject or find reasons to leave the room. I remember one particular evening in December 2023 when I'd been excited to show her a contract proposal for welding work on a new apartment complex. $50,000 over 6 months, enough to really establish the business as a legitimate operation. She'd barely glanced at the paperwork before saying she was tired and going to bed early. At the time, I'd chalked it up to work stress or seasonal depression. You don't want to believe that the person you married is already planning their exit strategy while you're preparing to serve your country overseas. From Qatar, with limited communication options and unreliable internet access, I started building my case in May 2024. The first step was reaching out to my union representative through the International Association of Bridge, Structural, Ornamental, and Reinforcing Iron Workers, Local 84. Union brothers take care of each other, especially when one of us is getting screwed over by someone who should have known better. James Crawford, my union rep, was a grizzled welder in his 50s who'd seen every type of workplace and family drama imaginable. He'd dealt with deployment issues before, including cases where spouses had liquidated businesses while their partners were overseas, working on military contracts or international projects. "Brother," he said over a scratchy international phone connection that cost me $20 for 15 minutes. She just violated about 6 different statutes: military protection laws, homestead regulations, and possibly federal fraud if she forged your signatures on those vehicle titles. We got legal resources specifically for situations like this. The union connection proved crucial in ways I hadn't anticipated. Local 84 had relationships with attorneys who specialized in protecting workers' assets, and they had dealt with similar cases involving deployed military members who were also union brothers. More importantly, they had investigators who could verify facts and document evidence while I was stuck halfway around the world. I also reached out to a few trusted guys back at Ellington Field, not to spread gossip or create drama, but simply to verify what Santos had told me. Military people understand operational security. You confirm intelligence through multiple sources before taking action. The confirmations rolled in over the next 2 weeks, each message more damning than the last. Yes, Isabella had sold the Challenger in early April for $14,000, half what it was worth after 3 years of modifications and upgrades. She'd posted it on Facebook Marketplace with photos that didn't show the custom interior work or the performance modifications I'd installed. Just basic exterior shots that made it look like a standard used car instead of the meticulously built machine it actually was. Yes, she'd liquidated the welding truck for $28,000 to a contractor in Beaumont who'd driven down to Houston specifically to buy it. According to my sources, she'd claimed I was getting out of the welding business and moving overseas permanently. A complete fabrication, but it explained why the buyer hadn't asked too many questions about the documentation. Yes, Perry Walsh had been living in our house for at least 6 weeks, starting sometime in mid-March. Neighbors had seen him coming and going regularly, parking his white Silverado in my driveway like he owned the place. One neighbor mentioned that Isabella had introduced him as her business partner who was helping her manage rental properties while her husband was deployed. Business partner. The audacity of that lie still amazes me. But the most damaging confirmation came from my union contact, who'd managed to track down the actual sales transactions. Isabella hadn't just sold my equipment. She'd forged my signature on both vehicle titles. That wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was felony fraud. I requested access to our banking records through the military family support system. What I found there painted a picture of systematic deception that went far beyond simple infidelity. Isabella had been making purchases I didn't recognize. New furniture from Ashley Home Store, electronics from Best Buy, even a 60-inch smart TV that had been delivered in early April. She'd used the money from selling my vehicles to fund a complete lifestyle upgrade. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, weekend trips to Austin and San Antonio. The bank statements showed regular charges at places I'd never been. Upscale restaurants, boutique hotels, wine bars, and trendy parts of Houston. Every transaction was time-stamped and recorded, creating a digital trail that documented exactly how she'd spent the money from liquidating my life's work. She'd even changed utilities into her name only and redirected some of the mail to a P.O. box I'd never heard of. But here's what made this investigation different from the usual cheating spouse scenario. I approached it like a military intelligence operation. 20 years of Air Force training had taught me the value of documentation, verification, and building airtight cases before taking action. I created spreadsheets tracking every suspicious transaction, cross-referenced dates with known events, and built a timeline that showed exactly when Isabella had started planning her new life. The pattern was clear. She'd begun liquidating assets within 2 weeks of my departure, suggesting this wasn't some impulsive decision made months into my deployment. This was premeditated. The union's legal team helped me understand the implications of what she'd done. James Crawford connected me with an attorney named Patricia Hernandez, who specialized in protecting workers' assets during family disputes. She'd handled cases involving offshore oil workers, merchant mariners, and military contractors, guys who spent months at a time away from home and came back to find their lives destroyed. "Your wife made a critical error," Hernandez explained during a secure phone call that cost me $40 but was worth every penny. She assumed that distance would protect her from legal consequences, but military protection trusts carry federal weight. She's not just dealing with state law anymore. The beauty of Isabella's betrayal was that she'd done all the work for me. Every transaction left a digital trail. Every decision she'd made without my consent was time-stamped and recorded. Her real estate background had made her confident about handling paperwork, but it had also created a paper trail that would be impossible to dispute in court. I documented everything methodically. Screenshots of bank transactions, copies of the vehicle title transfers with her forged signatures, statements from neighbors about the unauthorized occupant, photos from social media showing her flaunting the money she'd stolen from liquidating my business equipment. But the most damning evidence came from her own Instagram account. Isabella had been posting photos of her new lifestyle, expensive dinners, designer handbags, weekend getaways with Perry. One particularly infuriating post showed her wearing a $1,000 watch, purchased with money from selling my welding equipment, while captioning it, "Living my best life." No regrets. Oh, basta. New chapter. The hashtag choices revealed everything about her mindset. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't conflicted. She was celebrating the theft of my livelihood while I was serving my country overseas. I spent countless hours during my rare downtime reviewing documentation, cross-referencing evidence, and building what any reasonable person would recognize as an airtight case. But this wasn't about proving her guilt. That was already established. This was about ensuring that when I returned stateside, I'd have every tool necessary to pursue maximum legal consequences. The deployment felt longer than usual, but I maintained focus on my military duties. My commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Williams, noticed my dedication and even commended me for staying professional despite obvious personal stress. What he didn't know was that channeling my energy into methodical preparation was the only thing keeping me sane. Military training had taught me that emotional reactions get people killed. In combat, you assess threats, develop strategies, and execute plans based on logic rather than feelings. This situation required the same disciplined approach. Isabella had gambled that distance would make me powerless. She was about to discover that a prepared man with the right knowledge and legal backing is never truly helpless, regardless of how many miles separate him from home. When I finally got my orders to return stateside in late September 2024, I didn't tell Isabella. She hadn't responded to any messages in months anyway, so there was no point in giving her advance warning. The element of surprise would be crucial for what came next. I landed at Bush Intercontinental Airport on a Tuesday morning in early October. 6 months of deployment finally behind me. Instead of going straight home like most returning servicemen, I drove directly to Ellington Field and walked into Major Patricia Steele's office with a box full of documentation that would make any prosecutor smile. The Major had been expecting me. I'd sent encrypted emails through military channels over the previous weeks, keeping her updated on the evidence I'd compiled. She'd already reviewed everything and coordinated with the union's legal team to ensure we had all our ducks in a row. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," she said, shaking my hand with genuine respect. "This is one of the clearest violations of military protections I've seen in 15 years of JAG work. She didn't just bend the rules, she obliterated them." She spread my documentation across her desk like evidence photos from a crime scene. unauthorized property occupancy, fraudulent vehicle sales with forged signatures, violation of homestead protections, systematic theft of business assets, and clear patterns of premeditated deception. We can have legal notices drafted and served within 48 hours, Major Steele explained. The unauthorized occupant will be legally required to vacate immediately under federal military protection statutes. Your wife will be notified of civil violations and potential criminal charges for the forged signatures. What's the timeline for everything else? I asked. Civil penalties are mandatory under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Minimum $5,000 in fines, full restitution for any property sold without authorization, and permanent notation on county records that will affect her ability to purchase property anywhere in Texas. The union representative says they're prepared to file licensing complaints if any of your professional certifications were compromised by the equipment theft. James Crawford from Local 84 had been busy while I was wrapping up deployment. The union had its own legal protocols for protecting members' business assets, and they'd identified several violations beyond the basic theft. Isabella's sale of my welding equipment without proper documentation had triggered licensing and insurance issues that could affect anyone who purchased the equipment. The buyer in Beaumont is willing to cooperate, Crawford had explained in our final overseas phone call. He's a union brother too, and he's pissed off about being dragged into this mess. He's prepared to testify about the fraudulent sale if necessary. I nodded at Major Steele. Do it. File everything. That night, I checked into a Hampton Inn near Ellington Field. I could have stayed in temporary billeting on base, but I needed space to decompress and prepare mentally for what was coming. I ordered takeout from Papa's BBQ, brisket and ribs I'd been craving for 6 months, and reviewed my documentation one final time. The legal notices were served Thursday morning at 11:23 a.m. I know the exact time because the process server documented everything as required by federal law. The notices went to 2 locations: Perry Walsh at my house on Heights Boulevard, and Isabella at the Keller Williams office where she worked. According to the process server, a professional who'd handled hundreds of similar documents, Isabella went pale when she read the first paragraph. Her hands were visibly shaking by the time she finished the second page. The document was crystal clear and unambiguous. The property at the specified address was protected under a military protection trust, established prior to my deployment. Any occupancy, modification, or use of said property without the express written consent of Staff Sergeant Austin Rodriguez constituted a violation of federal law protecting deployed service members. Perry Walsh had 72 hours to vacate the premises, and Isabella Rodriguez was hereby notified of mandatory civil violations and potential criminal penalties. The legal language was precise and intimidating, designed to make clear that this wasn't a domestic dispute that could be resolved through negotiation. This was a federal matter involving the systematic violation of laws specifically designed to protect military families from exactly this type of betrayal. Silence for exactly 36 hours. Complete radio silence, just like she'd given me during deployment. But I knew the clock was ticking. Perry would be getting nervous, probably questioning whether his relationship with Isabella was worth potential legal consequences. Isabella would be scrambling, trying to figure out what her options were, possibly realizing for the first time that her real estate knowledge hadn't prepared her for military protection laws. Most importantly, they'd both be realizing that the distance that had once protected them from my reaction was now meaningless. I was back on American soil, armed with legal documentation and federal backing, ready to pursue justice through proper channels. My phone rang Friday afternoon while I was at the base gym, working through months of deployment stress and suppressed frustration. Unknown local number, but the area code was Houston. I answered on the third ring. "Is this Staff Sergeant Austin Rodriguez?" The voice was male, professional, but with an edge of barely controlled anxiety that immediately told me everything I needed to know. Speaking. "This is Lawrence Palmer. I'm an attorney representing Isabella Rodriguez. I'd like to discuss the legal notice my client received regarding the property situation." I let the silence hang for a long moment, savoring the words I'd been waiting months to say. "You should be talking to my attorney, Major Patricia Steele, at the Ellington Field Legal Assistance Office," I said calmly. "Mr. Rodriguez, I understand you're upset, but perhaps we could resolve this amicably without involving further legal complications. My client is willing to discuss compensation for the vehicles, and the occupant is prepared to leave voluntarily. It's Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I corrected him, and there's nothing to resolve amicably. Your client violated legally binding federal protections while I was deployed overseas serving my country. She sold protected property without authorization, forged legal documents, and allowed unauthorized occupancy of a federally protected residence. Those are facts, Mr. Palmer, not negotiations. I could hear him shuffling papers, probably the same legal notice I'd already memorized word for word. I understand your position, Staff Sergeant, but surely we can come to some arrangement that doesn't involve criminal prosecution. My client is prepared to make full financial restitution, and she's willing to sign over any remaining claims to the property. Mr. Palmer, I said, your client has 60 hours left to comply with a federal order before the Sheriff's Department gets involved. That's not voluntary cooperation. That's legal compliance under threat of arrest. And as for restitution, she sold property she had no legal right to touch while I was serving overseas. Contact Major Steele if you have actual legal arguments to make. I hung up, feeling calmer than I had in months. This wasn't anger anymore. This was the cold satisfaction of watching a carefully executed plan come together exactly as designed. The next call came Saturday morning while I was reviewing apartment listings. This time, it was Isabella herself, her name appearing on my phone screen for the first time since deployment. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Austin? Her voice was shaky, desperate in a way I'd never heard before. Austin, please, we need to talk about this legal situation. Now you want to talk? I said, after months of complete silence. How interesting. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but this legal action is insane. We can work this out between us like adults. Like adults? I repeated. The way you worked things out by selling my vehicles and moving another man into our house while I was deployed? That kind of adult behavior? It's not what you think, Austin. Things just happened, and I didn't know how to tell you. You didn't tell me anything, Isabella. You went completely silent for months and made a calculated bet that I'd be too far away to respond. You assumed my service made me powerless. That's not fair. Her voice shifted, taking on the edge I remembered from our worst arguments. You were gone all the time anyway. The military always came first. What was I supposed to do? Just wait around forever? You were supposed to be honest, I said. You were supposed to be my wife. And yes, you were supposed to wait, because that's what you promised when you married someone in the military. But you know what? I'm glad you didn't, because now I see exactly who you are. Austin, please. Perry already moved out. The house is empty. Can't we just call off the lawyers and work this out ourselves? Perry? I said. So that's his name. The car dealer who was living in my house, sleeping in my bed, driving around town in the truck he bought with stolen money. Good to know. You're being cruel. I'm being accurate. And no, Isabella, we can't just work this out. You violated federal law, you committed fraud, you disrespected a deployed service member. Those aren't things we smooth over with a conversation. What do you want? Just tell me what you want and we can end this nightmare. I want what's legally mine, I said. I want accountability for what you did. And I want you to understand that actions have consequences, even when you think nobody's watching. My lawyer says I could face serious penalties, fines, maybe even jail time for the forged signatures. Your lawyer is correct, I replied. You should listen to him. I ended the call and went back to apartment hunting. The settlement was finalized by early November 2024. Isabella paid the mandatory $5,000 fine for military protection violations, plus full restitution, $18,000 for the Challenger based on its actual modified value, $35,000 for the welding truck and equipment, and an additional $3,000 in penalties and legal fees. Harris County placed a permanent notation on her record regarding violations of military protection laws, something that would follow her for any future property transactions anywhere in Texas. The union helped me locate replacement equipment and even connected me with several contractors who'd heard about the situation through the Brotherhood network. I found a 2-bedroom apartment in Clear Lake, closer to Ellington Field, and used the settlement money to rebuild my welding business with better equipment than I'd lost. Word had spread through both the military community and Local 84 that I'd handled the situation professionally, and that reputation brought me more work than I'd ever had before. One evening in late November, I was sitting on my apartment balcony, coffee in hand, watching the sunset paint the Houston sky in shades of orange and purple. My phone buzzed with a text from Miguel Santos, asking if I wanted to grab dinner at our old barbecue spot. I realized something in that moment. I was okay. Not happy in some vindictive way, just stable, moving forward, building something new. The betrayal had happened. I'd dealt with it properly. And now I was creating a better life than the one Isabella had tried to destroy. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just living well and knowing you handled injustice with honor. If you enjoyed this story, like this video, and leave a comment telling me what you thought. Subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories like this one.